"You're early, Mark," the night manager of The Daily Grind said with a tired smile. He looked up from the mountain of paperwork and coffee orders that cluttered the counter. The clock on the wall ticked over to 10 p.m. The barista, Rachel, shrugged off her coat, revealing a faded t-shirt with the cartoon of a sleepy owl holding an espresso cup. "Couldn't sleep," she replied, her voice a mix of boredom and caffeine-induced alertness. She had worked the night shift before, but something about tonight felt different. The quiet town outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Mark handed her the usual laminated list of procedures for the night shift. "3 rules," he began, his tone more serious than usual. Rachel nodded, expecting the standard warnings about locking up and not serving after hours. 1. No lights on in the back room. 2. No music louder than a soft murmur. 3. Never, ever, answer the phone if it rings after midnight. Rachel's eyes widened slightly. Strange, she thought, but Mark was known for his quirks. The first few hours passed without incident. Rachel's thoughts drifted to her day job, her cat waiting at home, and the mystery novel she had tucked into her bag. The coffee machine hissed and sputtered rhythmically, a comforting backdrop to the otherwise silent night. The bell above the door chimed occasionally, bringing in a few sleepy-eyed regulars seeking refuge from their insomnia. But as the clock hands approached midnight, the air in the cafe grew thick with tension. Rachel could feel it in her bones, a prickling at the back of her neck that made her want to scream. She focused on the rules, reciting them in her head like a mantra. The soft glow of the open sign cast eerie shadows on the polished countertops. The bell jangled again, and Rachel's heart skipped a beat. A lone figure shuffled in, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a dusty hat. He took a seat at the counter, his movements slow and deliberate, and Rachel felt a knot form in her stomach. She forced a smile and asked for his order. He whispered, "Black coffee, please," his voice barely audible over the low murmur of the espresso machine. As she poured the dark liquid into a cup, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced over her shoulder, but the back room remained shrouded in darkness. The only sound was the ticking of the clock, the seconds stretching out like an elastic band ready to snap. She slid the coffee across the counter, her hand shaking slightly. The man took a sip, nodded in satisfaction, and then, without another word, he was gone. Rachel let out a sigh of relief, her nerves still on edge. The next 2 hours dragged by, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional car passing by outside. Rachel's mind began to play tricks on her, turning shadows into sinister figures and the hum of the fridge into whispers. She checked the clock for the umpteenth time, willing the minutes to tick away faster. The phone on the counter remained silent, a stark contrast to the unspoken dread that filled the room. Rachel tried to convince herself that the rules were just Mark's way of keeping her on her toes, a twisted game to pass the time. But deep down, she knew there was something more. Then, as the clock struck midnight, the phone rang, the shrill sound echoing through the emptiness. Rachel's hand hovered over the receiver, her breath catching in her throat. The silence of the cafe was shattered, and she knew she had to decide, stick to the rules, or risk finding out what lurked beyond the veil of the strange. She glanced at the darkened back room, the hair on her arms standing on end. With trembling hands, she reached for the phone, breaking rule number 3. The line was dead. Rachel's heart raced as she placed the receiver back in its cradle. The silence was deafening. Then, from the back, a soft click sounded, like a light switch being toggled. Rachel's eyes widened, and she spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. The back room door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light peeking through. She could have sworn she had locked it before starting her shift. Slowly, she approached, her body screaming for her to run. As she pushed the door open, the light flickered on, revealing a scene that made her blood run cold. The shelves were bare, the floor covered in a thick layer of dust. But in the corner, a single chair sat, facing the wall, an overturned coffee cup resting on the floor beside it. Rachel's mind reeled, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The silence was broken by a low, guttural whisper. Rachel spun around, her eyes searching the darkness beyond the door frame. "Serve coffee to the customer," the voice growled, the words barely discernible. Rachel's eyes darted to the empty cafe. There was no one there. Her heart thudding, Rachel stepped into the back room. The light flickered again, and she heard the sound of footsteps retreating into the shadows. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. "Serve coffee to the customer." Rachel's eyes searched the room frantically, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Suddenly, the lights went out. Rachel screamed, dropping to her knees, her hands gripping the cold tiles. The whispers grew into a cacophony, surrounding her, closing in. In the pitch black, she felt a hand brush against her arm and she jerked away, her heart pounding. She had to find a way to get through this nightmare. With trembling hands, Rachel fished out her phone, the screen casting a dim blue light. She opened the Notes app and typed a quick message to Mark. "Please explain the rules," she wrote, her thumbs shaking. "Something's wrong." She hit send, hoping against hope that he was still awake. As Rachel waited for a reply, she began to murmur a childhood prayer under her breath, her eyes squeezed shut tightly. The words provided a semblance of comfort, a lifeline to the world she knew. She recited the prayer over and over, her voice a soft echo in the deserted cafe. With each repetition, the whispers grew quieter, the darkness seeming to recede. When Rachel finally opened her eyes, the light was back on. The cafe looked normal again, the shelves stocked, the floor clean. The phone on the counter was silent. Her message to Mark remained unsent. Had it all been in her head? Rachel took a deep breath, willing her racing heart to slow. The clock read 1:15 a.m. She had 3 more hours to get through. The rest of the night was a blur of jitters and doubt. Rachel clung to the rules, not daring to push her luck. The whispers didn't return, but the memory of them lingered, a constant reminder of the unexplained. Her mind raced with questions. What was the significance of the chair, the dust, and the overturned cup? Who was the customer that she was supposed to serve? And why did it feel like she had just stepped out of a nightmare? As Rachel served the last customer, a chill ran down her spine. A shadow flitted across the window, a human silhouette moving quickly in the alley outside. She convinced herself it was just the wind playing tricks with the light. But when she turned back to the counter, she saw it. The dust on the floor had been disturbed, forming the faint outline of footprints leading from the back room to the front door. Her eyes followed the trail, and she noticed something peculiar. The footprints didn't stop at the door, they continued on the other side, into the cafe. Rachel's stomach dropped. Someone or something had been in the back room, and it hadn't left when she had. She checked the lock again, but it remained untouched. The final customer left, and Rachel was alone again. She cautiously approached the window, peering into the alley. The shadow was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. Rachel's shift was almost over, the first light of dawn seeping through the blinds. But she couldn't shake the sense that she was not the only one waiting for the sun to rise. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the darkness, Rachel felt a weight lift. She had made it through the night. But as she turned to lock the door, she caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold. On the chair in the corner, a fresh cup of coffee sat, steaming, as if it had just been poured. The dust around it remained untouched, the only evidence of the night's events. The next evening, Rachel returned to the daily grind, the memory of the whispers and the shadow in the alley etched into her mind. She resolved to stick to the rules more strictly, her nerves a taut wire. She flipped the open sign with trembling hands and took her place behind the counter, the laminated list of rules a grim reminder of the night ahead. The hours ticked by, each more tense than the last. Rachel avoided the back room like the plague, her eyes glued to the clock as it inched towards midnight. The music played at a hushed volume, the cafe's usual ambience replaced by an eerie calm that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. She wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time, trying to distract herself from the looming deadline. When the clock struck 12, Rachel held her breath. The phone remained silent, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, just out of sight. The quiet was so complete it was almost deafening. She told herself it was just the town's usual stillness, the night holding its breath like it had the night before. But she knew better. Rachel's eyes darted to the clock again, 1 a.m. The silence was unnerving. Even the usual late-night hum of distant traffic and the occasional chirp of a cricket was absent. She recited the rules in her head, her heart thudding against her ribcage. Rule number 1, no lights in the back room. She hadn't needed to use the back room yet, but the darkness beckoned, a silent threat lurking in the shadows. The phone remained silent, but Rachel felt eyes on her, watching her every move. She forced herself not to look up from her task, focusing on the mundane chore of organizing the pastries. The quiet was a living, breathing entity, pressing down on her, suffocating her thoughts. Then, without warning, the lights in the cafe flickered. Rachel's heart leapt into her throat. The flickering grew more frequent, the room plunging into darkness for a split second before the lights flared back to life. Her eyes shot to the back room, and she saw it, a faint light seeping from under the door. Her hand trembled as she reached for the flashlight, her eyes glued to the sliver of illumination beneath the door. Rule 1. No lights in the back room. Rachel's thoughts raced. What if she had left a light on by mistake? What if it was a trick of her imagination? But the light grew steadier, brighter. It couldn't be a mistake. With a deep breath, Rachel stepped towards the door. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices, all speaking in unison. "Serve the customer," they hissed, the words now clear and demanding. Rachel's hand hovered over the doorknob, her stomach twisting into knots. What awaited her in the darkness? The door swung open with a screech that seemed to split the night in two. Rachel's flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, revealing the chair. But this time, it was not empty. A figure sat hunched over, its back to her. Rachel's scream lodged in her throat as she took in the sight. The figure was dressed in a frayed Barista apron, its back a mass of twisted, unnatural angles. It did not move, did not breathe, but Rachel could feel its hunger, a palpable force that filled the room. The light from the flashlight grew dimmer, the whispers grew louder, and Rachel knew she had to get out. As she backed away, the figure slowly began to turn, revealing a face that was not human, a twisted mockery of a smile etched onto its features. Rachel stumbled, dropping the flashlight. The room was plunged into darkness. And then she heard it, the sound of the phone ringing. Rule number 3, her mind screamed. Don't answer it. But the ringing grew louder, more insistent, and Rachel's hand was drawn to the receiver like a magnet. She picked it up, her voice a trembling whisper. Hello. There was only static on the other end, but the whispers grew to a fever pitch, drowning out the sound of her own racing heart. Suddenly, the static cleared, and a deep, unearthly voice rumbled through the line. You have served the wrong customer, it said, the words sending a chill down Rachel's spine. She didn't know how it knew, but she realized with horror that she had made a mistake. The figure in the back room was not just a figment of her imagination, it was real, and it was angry. The lights in the cafe flickered wildly, the shadows dancing around her like malevolent spirits. The whispers grew to a crescendo, the pressure in her ears unbearable. Rachel knew she had to do something, anything, to survive the night. Immediately Rachel slammed the phone down, the cacophony of whispers abruptly silenced. In that brief instant of quiet, she heard the shuffling of feet behind her. She turned, her eyes searching the darkness, and saw the figure standing mere inches away. It reached out a hand, the skin like parchment, the nails long and sharp. Rachel's mind raced, searching for an escape, for some way to make this nightmare end. And then, she remembered the rules. The rules she had been so careful to follow. Except for one. Her eyes fell on the coffee machine, its light a beacon in the chaos. The figure took a step closer, the scent of decay filling her nostrils. Rachel lunged for the switch, her heart pounding in her chest. She flipped it off, plunging the room into absolute darkness. The silence was immediate, the pressure lifted. Rachel could breathe again. But she knew it was not over. The figure was still there, she could feel it. The phone began to ring again, the sound echoing in the emptiness like a funeral knell. Rachel took a deep breath and whispered the words of her childhood prayer, the only defense she had left. The ringing stopped, and Rachel waited, her heart thudding in her ears. The tension built, the darkness pressing in on her like a living thing. And then, the first ray of light began to seep through the cracks in the blinds, the promise of a new day. The figure slowly retreated into the back room, the shadows swallowing it whole. The cafe was still, the air heavy with the scent of fear. Rachel knew that she had not imagined the events of the night, but she also knew that she could not tell anyone. Not Mark, not the police, not even her closest friends. The rules had been broken, and the cost had been paid in terror. As dawn fully broke, Rachel unlocked the front door, the light of day pushing back the last of the shadows. She stepped outside, the cool morning air a stark contrast to the stifling fear of the cafe. The town was waking up, the sounds of cars and early risers a comforting symphony. But Rachel knew she would never be the same. The horror of the night clung to her like a second skin, a constant reminder of the rules she had dared to break. She glanced back at the cafe, the closed sign hanging in the window. Rachel knew that she would never work the night shift again. The rules of the daily grind had claimed their toll, and she had no desire to find out what other terrors lurked in the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to take her place.